the Gospel which we have just read is often taken in the context of the contemplative life. These two sisters, Martha and Mary, placed next to each other and contrasted. But the Lord in no way rejected the gracious service of this dear sister. He was basically trying to indicate that there was also another way of serving his person, and he perhaps might be saying that to us this evening. When somebody comes to us, two things happen. We initially talk a lot, do we not? We are somewhat agitated, and we block out even one moment of silence. Much effervescence, ebullition takes place initially, and that is the case more especially with an initial encounter when we do not know the person, because the groundwork is not done, and much of what is said is of little weight. The other thing that happens is that we tend to go straight for the kettle, and initially we are moving around, doing very much what Martha was doing, out of courtesy and generosity. Nevertheless, that is what we are doing, and it might be a good while before actually we settle down to a serious encounter between soul and soul. The groundwork is being done in the early stages. Let us look at our situation with the Lord. There is not a temptation, but a B-side to, for instance, a very heavily laden liturgical life in a monastery or a cathedral or whatever it might be, where much preparation takes place for the glory of God. But the more perfect the celebration is, or the liturgy, whatever it might be, in general, the more of the Martha comes into the serving of the Lord also. Of course, it's in that case more directly linked with the sacred and sacred by nature. However, there is a strong element of the material coming in, and we who have spent years as sacristan in the various monasteries of creation know full well what that involves. It is no mean task. It is full of little details which one cannot forget, to avoid that everyone has a surprise at the altar, and so on. The same applies to chant, to eventually the music ministry. And of course that, if one hasn't a serious interior life, can be actually quite subtle, another form of the problem of Martha. And one can find a situation, especially outside the monastic life, where people are creating great beauty, but actually are thinking all the time about the great beauty and not about the Lord. And one sees, for instance, that they might be coming straight from Holy Communion and aiming straight for the hymn sheet and the guitars, and the Lord hardly enters into the equation on the level of Mary. I heard one day from a person who was here, but from another country, some years ago by now. It was something that she had been quite concerned about in a very populous area of Italy, where there was a great choir and music ministry, but she knew that there was something not right in that particular situation, where the head of the choir was involved in an affair with a girl who was underage, who had not one but 2 abortions through him, and she was trying to get to the parish priest to explain how grave this situation was, and yet the beauty of the music carried on. That's 100% the Martha situation, excluding completely Mary, because we can't create beauty outside the honouring of the Lord on the level of the will. It's otherwise just pure cosmetics. But this, and this is the third bit I'd like to go in, very subtle form of Martha coming into our relationship with the Lord, is that of genuinely pious souls, and that might be our own case, who are so keen rightly so perhaps, of getting through every bit that we have undertaken to get through, that every moment of prayer is basically a catching up. In other words, it's a fight against the clock, and we're not really relaxing in the Lord's presence. And many people spend their holy hour just catching up and actually not resting. A very subtle form of this situation of Martha. So let's take that with us, because I remember in France when they were talking a lot about blessed by now Elizabeth of the Trinity, although at the stage when I was reading this she was not yet blessed. That happened in the mid-80s. It was that Carmelite who died at the beginning of the century, very young, at the age of 26 in her case, and went very quickly into the heights of sanctity and gave a whole teaching which has been picked up by the Carmelite school and indeed by the whole church on the indwelling, that is, the fact that we are temples. And in her spirituality there is this simplification of things. Of course, she was starting even from her own name, Elizabeth, the name of God living in a house, Beth is there. But it was something which I remember in this little thing that was given to us to read was put actually pictorially, and I leave that with you. It was this little sketch done presumably by a Carmelite nun of what? A little Carmelite in a position of quietly, maybe on a Taizé stool, just there gazing into the eyes of the Master and doing right naught, nothing at all, but gazing and waiting, and letting everything else rest. And in that gazing and waiting, the Lord could be Lord, and at last totally Lord in the case of that soul, because there was no obstacle to his whispering a word. So let's ask for that grace of being, as well as good servers, good listeners, and quiet, intimate friends of the one who sometimes just wants our attention and lets the rest wait. Unresting, unhasting, and silent as night, no wanting, no wasting, the road has been marked. Thy justice like mountains, high soaring above, thy clouds which are fountains of goodness and love. To all life thou givest, to both great and small. In all life thou livest, the true life of all. We blossom and flourish as leaves on the tree, and wither and perish, but not changeth thee. Great Father of glory, pure Father of light, thine angels adore thee, ordained in the sight. O Lord, we would render a help us to see. 'Tis thou nearest friend,